Hey, welcome to Life in the Leadership Lane. I'm your host, Bruce Waller, where I get to talk to leaders that are making a difference in the workplace and in our community. What did they do to get started? And what are they doing to stay there? And oh my goodness, are you in for a treat today as I'm getting to talk to newly released author. I'm just going to say that from the start. David McLaughlin. He is the founder of Pendulum Coaching, author of Modern Leadership, Leaving Vintage Leadership Behind. Exciting news. We're going to talk about that today. He's also a speaker, a music artist. As a matter of fact, I have one of his hits in my Spotify right now. And he is a volunteer leader and so much more. David, so good to have you on the show. How you doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic. Made me laugh when you said hits. I don't know that I have any hits, but that song, I know the one you text me
You,
sometimes when you're listening to it.
you
That
don't
is one
have
of
to
the most
go.
popular songs. Yeah,
You don't have to go. I love it. You're always like, hey, Bruce, there's more, and I've listened to others, but
yeah,
that's my go-to. Like, I
yeah.
just like, it's got a good beat.
A lot of people like that song. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It's
I
so
guess
much
it's I
fun.
guess it's a hit in my sphere of people. Yeah.
Hey, I always like to start out the show reflecting. And I like to reflect, like, when did I meet this guest that's on today? Or have I met them? Some I haven't even met until I get them on the show. But for you, we've met, oh man, we've met through the Oklahoma HR circles, through OCHRS, through the conferences. But here's the moment I remember. And tell me if you remember this. It was at the Oklahoma HR conference, and you were speaking about, I wrote down like the top bands and how they are aligned with leadership, because you're a music guy. And I remember you, David, standing up on top of a table and making a point. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to get to know that guy. He's got great energy and doing great things. Do you remember that, or is that something you always do?
No, I don't always do it, but that's probably my speaking greatest hit. Like people talk about that all the times. I think it was so shocking to people. But back before I had Pendulum Coaching, I was working full time at American Fidelity. I was there, and I kind of had like my side brand,
Mm,
and it was a full volume. And so all of my talks I did back then were music related. I would apply rock and roll stuff to business, and that talk in particular was, if I remember right, it was about uh, concerts and some things musicians do in concerts that we can learn from.
mm,
And climbing on the table was me telling a story about my son and I went to see this band, and the guy, we were on the front row. It was an outdoor show, and the guy, first song comes out, and he climbs up um, on top of us. Basically, we were holding him up, and I actually have a picture of it, and it was incredible. So I'm telling that story, and the point, if I remember right, to that was something to the effect of like making an impact, being different,
mm.
being unique, and the way he just came out first song right on top of everybody. It was really a fun moment for me and my son. We still talk about that actually.
David, you just took me back to that place. That's exactly what that was. I remember that full volume. And I love that. I love how you talk about like creating moments and experiences and making impact. I think we all want that. By the way, David is also the host. I didn't mention this. He's also the host of the Mindful Leader podcast. A new season's getting ready to come out, so you'll want to be sure and tune in on that. I got to be part of the first season. That was a lot of fun. And we talked a little bit of music there as well. But hey, I want to
Yeah,
kind of
let
kick.
me let me let me say one thing about that. I just changed the name to the Modern Leader podcast to fit with the book Modern Leadership. So I still have those episodes out there of the Mindful Leader, but we're changing it to the Modern Leader podcast. So if people are looking for it now, it's the Modern Leader podcast.
I love
Yeah,
that, the Modern Leader podcast. Okay,
yeah.
save that, folks. The Modern Leader podcast. I'm going to plug that in my Spotify, my Apple, and I can't wait to hear, see what evolves there. That is just so good. And you know what I love, David, before we get into your story? I love how we're in this age where I just thought about this when you shared that. We're in this age that we have to be agile. We have to be able to pivot and just go where we are led to go. And that's what you're doing here. Like you said, oh, I'm doing coaching, I'm doing consulting, which you do. I have this podcast. Here's the name of it. I have this new book out. Now I'm going to change. I'm going to pivot a little bit. Like, how hard is that? Let's just start right there. How hard is
Yeah.
that to do?
For me, it's impossible not to do. And I've heard my whole life, I've given this advice in to people of, you know, find your specialty, don't be so broad, drill down and be a specialist, and that increases your demand. And there's a lot of value and validity to that concept. I can't do it. I just can't do it. I've never been able to do it. I started out as a professional musician. I lived on a tour bus, traveled all over the country, played about 300 shows a year. I did that. Then I wanted to make some money because I was getting married, and I that's when I went to college. I went to college a few years later. Most people go right out of high school into college. I went to college after the music thing, and became a tax accountant.
Mm.
And there's a whole long story on that nobody's interested in, but I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And so I worked at a CPA firm for a while, and then I got hired by American Fidelity as their corporate tax accountant, and absolutely loved it. Then the first week of working at American Fidelity, I went to the orientation. And I'd always worked at smaller places. I didn't know what orientation was, but I had spoken at conferences and things like that. Just people having, because I was always kind of a natural speaker, and seminars. I'd done those. When I asked the person who was doing the orientation, who now were dear friends, I said, "What is this? Like, explain it to me." And so she explained to me what training and development was. And I was like, "Oh, that sounds fun." And I was still there at American Fidelity a few years as a tax accountant, but then they did a reorg and a spot came open in the training department. And it was a step back for me financially and career wise. But I was like, as much as I loved accounting, which I did, I thought this is really me. So I got in there and then ended up, AVP leading the whole team on that over the
Mm.
years and just had a blast. And then as I started I just felt like I'd done everything I could do at American Fidelity after 18 years. So I thought, I think I'm going to start my own coaching and consulting because people tell me all the time, when are you going to do that? When are you going to do that?
Mm.
I thought, well, let's try it and see if it works. So I started out focusing just on mindfulness
Mm.
because I was really passionate about it. I thought it was good for leaders. And then all those conversations tied into emotional intelligence also. So I thought, I think emotional intelligence is a little easier for organizations to understand. So I added emotional intelligence, and I turned away all other business, like all other stuff. I was like, go here, go see this person, this person, this person, this person. Finally, I had to realize, and I'm like 3 years in to my practice now. I had to realize that people see me a certain way and they want certain things from me. And a lot of that is the leadership coaching, that more broad. I was very
Mhm.
narrow and specific, and now went ahead and accepted it, and I've broadened up to more of the leadership type of just regular, leadership coaching and consulting. And so I still have the mindfulness, I still have the emotional intelligence, but it's just a broader thing.
It's interesting. Every time I go to an event and I see these top lists on what CEOs think about, leadership development's always at the top.
Yeah.
It's always a top, top five, top three. And it's something that we need more of. And I'm glad that you recognize that. And now you've said, hey, you know what? This just needs to be part of it. So not
Yeah.
only did you recognize that, then you decided you need to write about it. And so you've written a book now, Modern Leadership, and I want to talk about that. Like, was that part of it? Have you been writing the book for a long time, or did you talk a little bit about
Yeah.
the process of like when you first thought about writing Modern Leadership, and then until you actually did it?
So honestly, I've started like probably 6 or 7 books. Some of them I didn't get very far in.
Okay.
Some I got like halfway through, and then
Hmm.
I'm like halfway through the book, and I'm like, I hate this. I
Mm,
just don't like the way it's coming out. Like I'd have a concept for an idea,
yeah.
and I'd work on it, and then it just didn't work out, and it was frustrating to me. It was
Mm,
very frustrating. And then I had the idea that like what I really need to do is write a book for my clients, like the
mm.
people I coach, the people I consult with. Like I can just at the beginning of the work, here's a book. Like this is what you need to read and think about. And there are lots of great books, and I'm always recommending books other than mine. And I recommend your books to
Yep.
people.
Thank you.
And I finally hit on this concept of modern leadership because I contrast that with vintage leadership. And here's how I explain vintage leadership.
Okay.
Bruce, do you like classic cars? Some people do, some people don't. I don't know. I don't know. Do you like
You know
classic?
what? I'm not one that's going to go to a classic car show, but when
Right.
I'm like driving in Duncan, Oklahoma or somewhere and I see all these classic cars come down, it gets my attention. I think it's
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
cool.
And that's the way everybody is. I was having dinner with my son the other night, and we were walking in Edmond, and there was a I don't know, I can't tell what year, but I guess probably somewhere between like 58 to 61 Cadillac, convertible Cadillac, red, beautiful. And there's people gathered around it, just like, oh, this car is gorgeous. That's what we do with vintage things. They're old, they're classic, and we look at them with great fondness.
Mm,
The problem is, have you ever driven a classic car?
mm,
It drives like a 57 Chevy drives like a 57 Chevy.
yeah.
And it doesn't have all of the modern comfort, amenities, tools, all the things that our cars have today. We look at it like, oh, that's cool. That's so great. I'd love to have one of those. But until you have to work on it and drive
Mm.
it and really live in it. And I got that from a guy I know who used to restore vintage cars years ago. He'd always say, well, it still drives like a 57 Chevy. And a lot of us are doing that in leadership. We're using old, outdated models because it's all we ever have seen, it's all we've ever experienced, it's all we know. So we're just doing the same thing that we kind of grew up with. And really, those things aren't working anymore. They're
Mm.
broken. And we have to lead in a new way. We have to stay current on what society, the world, the business environment, all of that is like today. And so we need to leave vintage leadership behind and be modern leaders.
Okay, first of all, thank you for sharing and being vulnerable about how you've written books after books after books and had this idea, and you get halfway through it and you're like, I don't see, because I think a lot of people see tip of the iceberg. Wow,
Right,
how'd you
right.
write that book? Well, you know what? I've written 6 books to get to this one. And it
Yeah,
sounds to me
absolutely.
like you found your lane on this particular book because you were not writing a book just to write a book. You were writing a book to really help people. I had a lady tell me when I wrote my very first book, Find Your Lane, I told her, I said, hey, I'm going to write this book. And she said, well, as long as you have an anchor, it's going to be great. And I said, well, what's an anchor? And she said, your anchor is something that's going to get you through the days when you read it, because you're going to read it hundreds of times.
That's
And
for
you're going to
sure. Yeah.
eventually say, oh my gosh, who's even going to read this? But my anchor at the time was I wanted to write a book for my children, their children. I wanted to put some stories in there. I wanted to tell about my career. And hey, wouldn't it be cool to give somebody a copy of my book when we went to coffee? And I remember when it happened, I was reading my book and I was like, oh, who's going to read this? And all of a sudden that anchor came in and
Yeah.
it pushed right through that wall. And it sounds to me like that's what happened for you. Like you had a purpose for writing that book, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a creative person. Like I'm just naturally a creative person. I'm
Yeah.
entrepreneurial. I'm creative. I talk to people sometimes. They're like, I don't have any creativity in me, and I'm like, you do. You just need to find it. But some people are more creative than others, and I like to create. I like to produce. I like to put
Yeah.
things out. And so I love the idea of
Yeah.
writing a book. But like you say, the actual process of doing it is a whole other thing. And boy, you do read it 100 times, and you do part of being creative is like when you put your art or your work or whatever it is out there, there's this like panic and
Mm.
fear. Nobody's going to listen to this. Nobody's going to read this. Nobody's going to buy this. Nobody's going to be interested in it. And I'm an idiot and I'm worthless. And who am I to write a book?
Yeah.
Creatives have all of that stuff going on in the background, but you have to push through that and believe in what you're offering. You have to believe that, like, and I'll tell you what, whether it's my music or the book or whatever, I just decided I'm writing what I think is good, what I think
Mm,
is important,
yeah.
and your audience kind of comes to you. Like when you are authentic and you put your real self out there, instead of trying to reach everybody, just put out what you believe in, and then the audience comes to you.
I want to touch on that for a second. I think that's important because I think a lot of people, they want to be authentic. They want to put themselves out there. They want to be real, but they just can't do, they can't hit the, they don't want to be on camera, or they just don't want to put something out there. And they have tremendous value in on the inside. How did, like, was that just like, is that just natural to you, or can people learn to be authentic?
It's not natural, and I'll tell you why. And I won't go into all of this, but I grew up in an environment where I was not allowed to be authentic. Societal pressures, family pressures, those kinds
Yeah.
of things. It's like, David, you have these ideas, but this is the way it's supposed to be, and you need to get over here in this lane. I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm sorry, I drive in the fast lane. I drive over here. And for a long time, professionally, my personal life, everything, I was conforming to what everybody else wanted me to be. Bruce, I was 50 probably
Yeah.
before I know I only look 35. People looking at the video of this
You're
are like,
looking good,
"God,
man.
you can't be
For
50, right?"
those who are listening right now, you should just see David. He looks great. I love it.
But I was probably 50 before I finally said, I don't give a crap anymore. And some of
Mm,
that comes with age. Like when you're
yeah.
younger and you're making your
Yeah.
bones and you're coming up, you're doing one, you don't really know who you are authentically, and you're just trying to make your way. So you're trying to please people to get promotions and all those kinds of things. I got to a place where, like, I don't care anymore. I have to be my authentic self because I can't live with myself any other way.
Oh, I do want to get into the book. I want to ask a few questions, but before we do that,
Sure.
you mentioned something that I think the listeners would really enjoy hearing this. And that is, you mentioned that you had a full-time job, but yet you
Mhm.
did speaking and some writing, different things on the side. And I think that's
Yeah.
important for people to hear, because a lot of times people think that, "Yeah, I got this full-time job. I don't have time to do whatever that is. I'd like to do consulting. I'd like to be a speaker. I'd like to write a book, but I got this full-time job." How did you balance that? Where did that come from? It may
Yeah,
be a
there's
tip for
a
somebody.
sure, there's a lot to it. So this I always felt like I was a high performer at my company. I was valued, I was used a lot. Some of this comes from, like, I don't know, personal insecurity, but I always in the back of my mind thought, what if you get canned? Right?
Mm,
Like what if something happens and you get fired? So I'm always thinking like safety nets, right?
mm,
And so I have one of my great mentors who used to be my manager at American Fidelity at Bev Wood. She has a talk she gives called "Always Have a Side Hustle," and this wasn't a money
mm.
making side hustle for me. I just spoke at a lot of conferences. American Fidelity encouraged me to go out and speak, and so I just kind of felt like I needed a brand, a concept. And because I love rock and roll, I came up with the full volume thing. And eventually that's another thing that changes, right? That ran its course. I thought, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to have a different focus. So that's why I switched over to Pendulum Coaching as my brand. But really it was just, I don't know if that's out of fear, necessity, or what, but I thought I need to brand myself and go out and do other things. And most of those talks I did, Bruce, were for free because I had a good paying job and I'm not trying to make money off of this. I was just trying to do something to, help people and then make it
Yeah.
entertaining for myself along the way with the branding.
I love that. I think brand's important. It doesn't matter what role you're in. If you're in mobility, if you're in HR, if you're in finance, you need to have that brand, because a brand will do a lot for you, and it will also give you tremendous fulfillment when you
Right.
are aware of that as well. Hey, I want to get into this book,
Sure.
Modern Leadership, and this is exciting. I mean, David's holding up his book right now. Uh, it, why don't you just kind of start it off? Just share, maybe, I don't know. I got to be one of the proofreaders, and
You
was
did.
gladly to endorse your book. I thought it was phenomenal. I love the principles in the book, but I want you to share. Maybe share. a couple of chapters or a couple of concepts that really you're proud of, that you feel like people, when they pick up
Yeah.
the book and they read it, they're going to get a lot of insight from that. Would you share that?
Yeah, I'll give you kind of just a quick rundown of the book. First, we talk about what vintage leadership is, which I already
Okay.
explained, what modern leadership is, that I explained. And then there's 14 chapters where we go through what I call 7 contrasts. So, like structures, vintage leadership is all about hierarchy and those kinds of things, and things have to go up and down the chain, compared with modern leadership, which is more collaborative. Then you have methods, the way you do things. You have servant leadership mindset is more of a modern leadership versus the vintage, which is like an authoritarian. And then you have your focus. Are you focused on tasks or are you focused on people?
Mm,
Now, one thing I want to be real clear here is modern leaders believe in getting stuff done just like vintage leaders do.
mm,
You have to get stuff done. If you don't, the doors close, right? You're out of business. But it's a difference in how you go about it. Am I focused on the task themselves, or am I focused on the people who do the tasks? And
mm,
that's where you
mm,
kind of change there. And then you have, like, how do you communicate as a vintage leader? It's limited communication. Knowledge is power. I don't want you to have the same knowledge I have, and so I'm keeping secrets. And this is up and down, the organization. Or are we transparent, as transparent as we can possibly be? There are times, sometimes you have to maintain some, a lack of transparency about things for various reasons. But I believe on putting all the cards on the table that you can possibly put for everybody in the organization. It makes everybody function better. And then relationships.
mm,
As a leader, do I have transactional relationships or transformational relationships? Am I trying to help transform people, or am I just like, I'm using you to get out of you what I need to get my metrics done, and I don't care if I burn you up, use you up, whatever. It's all about the metrics. I really want to be transformational as a leader rather than transactional. And then how do we deal with change? Organizations tend to
mm,
like stability and control, right? Because at least we know what's happening as long as we're controlling everything. When you do that, you're trading innovation and you're trading getting information from all the people in the organization who have all of this wealth of knowledge, but because we at the top think we know everything, we're ignoring them when they're actually the ones closest to the work and the customers, and we need to be listening a lot more, and that helps our change.
mm,
Finally, it's decision making. How do we
mm,
make decisions? Do we make decisions in that authoritative, I'm the leader, I'm the expert, I know best, or are we inclusive? Kind of similar with change. We get all the information from as many people as we can. And so those are the 14 chapters right there that go
mm.
through all of that. Then several people read it. Somebody said, that's great. And I'm a very concept person. So I'm explaining the concept in the book, right? Somebody said, just tell me what to do. So I have a chapter
I
I have a
love that.
chapter of what to do. Like
Mm,
this is what you do
yeah.
and have to do to be a modern leader. I also talk about what to do if you're stuck in a vintage
Mm.
organization. So that's the book right there.
I love that. I love all of this. And I love the book when I was reading it. One of the things I'd love, the last part, I think a lot of people would love to hear this. And without giving your book away, because I want people to
Yeah,
go
yeah,
pick up the book, go get it on Amazon, and be sure and give it a review. I think that's important. Uh, but for people that are in vintage organizations or they are surrounded by vintage leaders, how do they get past that? Because like you mentioned the car analogy earlier, do you go
yeah.
trade in the car and go get a modern car? How do you work through that? Because to me, I've been in some situations where it wasn't ever going to change. It's
Right.
either A, you embrace it, or B, you move on. But I've
Yeah.
also been in organizations where I've seen transformation happen. Talk a little bit about that, and how would people approach that? Yeah.
So one of the things I want to be clear about, and I'm mentioned it several times in the book, is we're not talking about throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right?
Okay.
We're not saying that now in 2024 we have ideas that nobody has ever thought of before, and everything old is bad. There are some things that were good right, about vintage leadership.
Mm.
But a lot of it has to do with your paradigm and your perspective, how you look at it.
Mm.
So I'm not talking about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I'm talking about shifting. So, but in your car trading analogy, yes, I would be more in favor of trading in for an updated car. It's still a car, right? It's still leadership, still has four wheels, still gets you there. But I would say, yeah, let's trade in for a different car. But for people who are stuck, I have I used to love David Letterman, have a top 10 list. So I'll just tell you the 10 things real quick.
Oh, I love that.
And
Okay.
they're little paragraphs to each of these things. But number one, understand the organization's culture, right? So you have your ideas, you have the way things ought to be, but you really need to have a solid understanding of the culture in your organization before you try and implement any change. Number two, build relationships.
Mm.
Everything gets done through people and relationships, and we can think we have the best ideas in the world, but if we don't build those relationships to make change
Mm.
happen, it's never going to happen. Number three, respect the past but
Mm.
embrace the future. The organization got there before you came along. They built it. They were successful, and you wanted to go work there. So respect that past, but it doesn't mean we don't need to change. We do need to change. But if people feel like you're not respecting the past of the organization, they're not going to listen to what you say. Then lead by example.
Mm.
Be the kind of leader that you want other people to uh, see and be. So you have to lead that way in yourself. Then communicate effectively, clearly articulate what it is you're wanting to do. Most of the failures in my career, when I wanted change to happen and it didn't happen, on reflection, years later, I look back, I didn't do a good job selling my ideas.
Mm.
And so it's on me. It's not on the organization. It's on me. I was not compelling enough, convincing enough, whatever. So, communicating effectively is really important. Then empower others. You need to empower your team so other people can see that it can work, right? So empower others. And then navigate bureaucracy. Every organization has
Mm.
some level of bureaucracy. The bigger the organization, the more bureaucracy and the more perilous the bureaucracy. But it's usually there for a reason, right? So you have to understand it and you have to learn how to navigate that bureaucracy. Then be patient and
Mm.
persistent. Don't walk in and think you're going to change your organization in 6 months. When I was in American Fidelity there for 18 years, I always took a long view of leadership, and I think that was paramount to whatever success I had there was that I took a long view of things. And then invest in development. You have to develop your team and those around you. So spend the time, money, effort, energy, whatever it is to develop people. And then number 10, consider leaving. Sometimes you're in a place
Mm.
that's just not going to have it.
Mm.
And when you've done all you can do, you need to consider going somewhere else where you'll be more aligned with the organization and you'll be happier and they'll be happier.
David's top 10. You heard it here, right here on Life in the Leadership Lane. I love that. Like I have chills. Like I wrote all of these down and I put down arrows by things that I feel like I've gotten better at.
Yeah.
And also areas where I feel like you probably in your practice help people with these. So here's my arrows.
Okay.
Number one, lead by example. Like I've really worked hard through my 25 plus year career in the relocation business on leading by example. Early on, some days I didn't do a very good job of that, but today I really work on that. The second thing, communicate effectively. I think that's like one of the misses we all have is like, I went and invested into Toastmasters. I'm part of the National Speakers Association of North Texas. I've really tried to work on communicating effectively. And a lot of that is through what you talked about earlier, emotional intelligence as well. And then one of the things I think I've probably got best on is patience.
Yeah.
I've always
Yeah.
wanted to just like get it done, get it done, get it done.
Right.
And I've gotten better. Like sometimes you're like, hey, just be patient. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. And everything is around perspective. And so I love that. So are these, you mentioned that when you finally decided you had a book and you wrote it for others, clients. Is this one of the areas where you focus on helping people?
Yeah, absolutely. I have people, a lot of my clients are sent to me, right?
Okay.
So it's like we have a leader, they're a rainmaker, they're doing good,
Yeah.
whatever, but they're horrible with people. So organizations call me up and say, "Hey, can you fix Bob?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know if I can fix him, but we can definitely talk and have some discussions and work on it, right?" And so
Okay.
that's one of the things I love. And that is definitely, all of those things are things that we get into with
Yeah.
my clients. As you were talking about being patient, it made me think another one of my mentors is Jeanette Rice. She was over our HR division, then she ended up becoming the president of the company, and she challenged me so much. But one of the things I saw her do over and over and over is she would have us as a team research research this thing, put together a proposal, and let's pitch it. And this is especially when she was over our HR division. And then we'd pitch it to the leadership and they wouldn't take it. And she'd say, "We'll just put it in the drawer and keep it because the time will come back around when we'll
Hmm.
have another shot at this." She would also sometimes we'd get all the information together and she'd just say, "I don't think we're ready for this organizationally right now. Keep it in the drawer, pull it out when we're ready." So having
Mm.
that long view and that foresight of, yeah, we want to make everything perfect, but you can't do everything at once. And the organization has other priorities. You have to pull things out at the right time. And that makes a huge difference.
That's so good. Hey, let me ask you this, David. I've had people ask me this about my book before, and I want to ask you about your book. Who needs to read this book?
So, as an author, trying to make a few bucks off of this, I'd love to say everybody needs to read it, but
Everybody.
but I honestly don't think
Yeah.
so. It's for people who either are in leadership or really desire to be in leadership.
Okay.
And so this book is about leadership. And so I'd say if you're in leadership or want to be in leadership, that's really who needs to be reading this book.
I love that because that could be entry level, that could be mid career, that could be late career. But if you're
Right.
in leadership or you have a desire to be in leadership, it's for you. And you
Yeah.
probably get a lot from that. I love that. Modern leadership, leaving vintage leadership behind. Man, how excited are you? I mean, to actually, okay, you thought of the idea, you put it on paper, you published it, now it's getting in people's hands. Like, how does that make you feel?
Well, it's very satisfying. That's the creative part of me. Like I had an idea,
Yeah.
concept, put it together, got it out. And I'm a big believer in putting it out. A lot of people, until it's perfect, they won't release anything.
Mm.
Bruce, there came a point where I just had to put this book out. And can I tell you what happened? As soon as I published it and other people started hearing it, people started giving me ideas and feedback. I'm like, "Oh, I wish that was in the book. That would be so much fun."
It's your next
Right?
book.
Yeah, which I'm already thinking about. And so you just have to put it out.
Yeah.
You can't wait for things to be perfect.
Yeah.
You want to make it good. You want it to be high quality, but it's never going to be perfect. Every artist that's ever recorded a record, no matter
Mm.
how big the record, they say, there's things on there I don't like. I wish I'd change. Every author would like to go back and add things in. I'm sure you experience that with your
Hmm.
books.
Yeah.
Just any project we do at work, it's like, oh, if we had just done this, life's not that way. You have limitations and constraints, and you have to do what you can in the constraints, and then just put it out there.
I think that's a common thread among high performers. They share that often with me, and that is people wait for things to be perfect and they never happen.
Right.
And you just have to get to 85% and then put it out there and then
Go.
make
Yeah,
adjustments along the way. And if you need to
that's right.
write another book, go write another book. This is, man, this is so good. Hey, let me ask you. I mean, you're driven like you're a musician. You have albums out. Now you have a book out. You've had an incredible career, and I feel like it's just like really getting traction. You're a podcast host. What drives you?
Honestly, I'll be vulnerable and honest. It's not on my mind daily this way, but I can tell you it propelled me this way. My dad, he's passed away now, was not the best dad. In that, like he loved me, he didn't beat me or anything
Yeah.
like that.
Right.
But my dad did not work. Like he would go to work for 6 months and then get injured in quotes. He'd find a
Yeah.
way to, get some workers' comp or something. And that was his career. He wouldn't work for 3 years and he'd work for 6 months. My dad was not a worker. And I grew up and extreme poverty because of that. My mom is a saint. She worked her butt off to take care of 3 teenage boys and a
Mhm.
grown man and just did an incredible job. But growing up in that environment, a lot of my drive, I've been to
Mm,
therapy, so I think this is where it comes from. A lot of my drive comes from I don't want to be like him,
mm,
right? I don't want to be like that. I had kids. I wanted to be able to provide a good life for them.
yeah,
And so that's a big chunk of it. The other side of it is, like I said earlier, I'm just a creative person and I like to
yeah.
produce. And so I think those two things together make me really compelled to get at it.
I talk about this a lot whenever we are networking. A lot of times it gives you a chance to see what good looks like and not so good looks like. And that's basically what you're saying is
Absolutely.
like,
Yeah.
hey, I've seen this side and I've seen this side, and this is where I want to go. And
Right.
a lot of times we're grateful for being in those positions, for being able to see that. And like, okay, well, I don't want to go this way. I want to go that way. And that's I appreciate you sharing that.
Let me say one more thing about that, because you hit a thing in my brain, not just with family and things like that, but at work. Everybody wants to work in a perfect environment.
Yeah,
And that's this book is about that. Let's get to a better,
yeah. Okay.
workplace. Yeah. But everybody, if you have a career very long, you're probably going to have some really crappy bosses at some
Yeah,
point, right?
right.
Boss, I was in my 20s, who at the time I thought he was amazing and brilliant. As I've progressed in my career and learned what good leadership, I realized he was like the epitome of everything of not to do, right?
Mm.
So, like you say, sometimes you learn what not to do,
Mhm.
and that's a blessing. Like it was bad working under some of those people and in those some of those circumstances, but it's a blessing because I can take and say, okay, I learned what not to do.
I had 2 bosses during my career that at the time I was a little frustrated with. And
Yeah,
when I look back, they had the best advice. The first one said, I was getting ready to leave the organization. I was trying to get a raise and I
yeah,
couldn't get a
right,
raise.
right.
And I remember him, the CEO, saying, Bruce, it'll never be about the money. And at the time,
Yeah,
I'm thinking, I've got 3 kids. I need to feed
yeah,
them.
yeah. It's
Uh, but
definitely
I,
about the money, right?
but the job I went to paid a lot more, and it was horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And then I
Mm-hmm.
went back and took a job for even less pay than I was making with that company, and it was
Right.
great. And so so we can learn a lot from from those situations as well. So I'm glad you shared that because you're right. This isn't about being in the perfect environment, setting up the perfect environment. This is just about being able to recognize and having perspective, like you said before, and just getting a little bit better on handling
Yeah.
certain things, right?
Yeah, one of the things I talk to my clients about a lot is I love the word alignment. And that really came into
Mm,
my life through another guy who was a mentor to me, Hal Adler.
mhm.
That alignment is so critical. I want to be aligned with people, organizations,
Yeah,
clients, friends, whatever, who share my stuff. Now, nobody's going to be 100%. There's never going to be perfect overlap, right? And that's
yeah.
good for us to not agree all the time. We need that tension because that's where we grow from. But overall, I'm always looking for alignment. We have this similar values and purposes and missions. And when the alignment is there, it goes so much better. When the alignment's not there, it's a total train wreck.
Modern Leadership, Leaving Vintage Leadership Behind by David McLaughlin. You are going to enjoy this book. I want to encourage each of you to reach out and get a copy. I'm going to put a link in the show notes. I do want to ask you, what's something I haven't asked you about the book that you want people to know? Like you're like, hey, before I leave the show today, I want to make sure I said this about this book.
One of the things I tried to do in the book was tell a lot of stories. So I have stories from some of my coaching clients, names changed to protect the guilty.
Okay.
Um,
I love that.
so I have a lot of stories of those. I have stories from the news. I tried to bring in stats and figures, and that was all important to me to make rather than just like an academic thesis on a theory. I wanted to make it, down to earth and livable. This is where the rubber hits the road. So there's a lot of that in there in every chapter. There are stories and things like that, and that makes it more interesting to me. So I assume it makes it more interesting to other people as well.
No, I thought you did a great job, and especially the contrast and comparison sections. I think that like helps people like see it from different
Yeah,
angles as well. and it's also easy to read. A lot of
Oh,
times
good.
I get into different books and I'm like, oh man, that's really deep. I got to really think through this. Where this is more of, it gives you different perspectives and helps you kind of clarify. Hey, you know what? I'm going to work on this quarter or this month. You don't have to do it all at once either, do you?
Right, right. Well, I appreciate you saying it's easy to read because that's one of my biggest hangups. Even when I look through it still, I just think, it's that creative nagging thing in the back, like, oh, is this too much? Is it, and so,
Yeah,
and people will tell you, oh, I loved your book. That's great, because they don't want to say, I hate that book to your face, right? They don't want to say it
yeah,
to your face. So
yeah.
I appreciate that. And that means a lot to me. I tried really hard to make it readable.
Yeah, it's so good. You're going to really enjoy this. Modern Leadership, Leaving Vintage Leadership Behind. You can get that on Amazon, Kindle, paperback. Is it on Audible yet?
I'm going to do an Audible version, but I just wanted to get the book out
Love
there
it.
first.
Love
So
it.
probably in a few months we'll have the Audible version out.
I did the same thing. I put my books out. In fact, my last book, Drive with Purpose, I put the Audible version about a month after I published the book. But then I did Find Your Lane and Life and Leadership Lane, which were like 3 years and 7 years later.
Yeah.
So,
Hey,
uh,
that's fine. It's still out there. Yeah.
hey, it's like you said, you don't have to be perfect from the start. You just get it
That's
out
right.
there.
That's right. And I love Audible. Generally what I do is I listen to most books on Audible, and then if I really like the book, I
Ah,
go ahead and buy the
love
print
that.
version of it.
I love that. I love that. Hey, I want to shift to, it's time to accelerate. I do want to ask you a few fun
Right.
questions. One of the things I always talk about, great leaders or grateful leaders. David, what are you grateful for?
I am, I think, most grateful for my family and friends.
Mm.
Um, just I really value relationships, and I can be grateful, and I am grateful for any number of things. My car. I love my car so much. Bruce, I have a 2019 Jeep Grand Cherokee, and I can't tell you, it's like home. I love my car so much. I'm grateful for that. And that's kind of a silly thing, but man, I just love it. But really, the family and friends are just so meaningful to me,
Yeah.
and I try to invest in them and cultivate those relationships to keep them around.
I got two more questions. One, I do like to ask a question around what energizes you. I know you're a creative person. I know you just wrote your book. You've been really head down writing this, getting this out there. But what do you like to do outside that energizes you? I think I've seen some videos of you and, is that your brothers that have a group singing?
So we used to, years ago, my
Okay.
brothers and I sang. We recently had a 30th anniversary concert. We hadn't sang together at all in, I think, 18 years. We'd done like a fundraiser event or something just one time, and we did a reunion concert, and that was so much fun. So, yeah, music energizes me so much. I'm very passionate about it. I love reading and learning energizes me. 'Cause I feel like there's so much to know in the universe, and I know like a teeny tiny speck of it. And so I'm always fascinated to learn more about any number of topics.
I love that. And be sure and go to Spotify and pull up David McLaughlin. You can download his album. Man, it's,
It's David B. McLaughlin. There's a very
oh,
famous
okay.
bluegrass musician. And so I use my middle name in business anyway. And so I just carried that over to my
Okay.
albums. David B. McLaughlin. The first album was Raise the
Ah,
Dead. The second album is called The Stranger. I had to
I
think
love
about, what was
that.
it called?
Yeah, The Stranger.
Stranger.
Yeah.
So,
It's so
yeah.
good. Like that to me, that's energizing because you're in your lane. You're like,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
like joyful to you. And when I talk
Right.
to people that have, they're joyful, it brings joy to me. And I just think that's so cool.
And Bruce, I'm not a great singer. I have two brothers who are amazing
Yeah,
singers.
they're
I'm
all,
not great, but this is just something I had a passion inside me that I had to
yeah,
do. It's all old
love it.
blues covers and stuff, and I just wanted to
Love it.
try it.
Final question. David, 10 years older. He's around the corner. He's knocking at your door, and you're going to go answer that door. What's he going to tell you?
He's gonna say, "Are you shocked at how I look 10 years later?" And then he's gonna say, "Man, you didn't do it all right, but you did the best you could, and that's all that
Mhm.
matters."
I love that. That's a wise 10 years older David McLaughlin. Newly released book, Modern Leadership by David McLaughlin. And I'm excited for you, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom and some of the insights from the book. I know that the book's going to do really well. I'll put all the information in the show notes so people can click on those links. If somebody heard something from you, David, and they want to follow you, or maybe they have a question, how's the best way for them to reach out?
So the easiest way is LinkedIn. I love connecting with people in LinkedIn and watching what they're doing in addition to them learning what I'm doing. So I love that connection. And then my website is pendulumcoaching.com. So they can always go there and learn
Yep.
what's going on.
Fan, yep. Fantastic. And be sure if you reach out and connect with David, be sure and let him know, hey, I heard you on Life and Leadership Lane, and maybe share something about his book or something that's made impact for you, and it makes the connection so much easier. And by the way, if you need any consulting or coaching, reach out to his firm, and I know that he can help you there as well. And so, man, I appreciate you. I'm so excited for you and happy for you. And I cannot wait to see what's ahead for you, my friend.
Well, thank you, Bruce. I appreciate it. And I appreciate our friendship. And I want to say, I thought it would come up somewhere else, but it hasn't yet. But I want to say a lot of what I do, particularly on the book writing and things like that, I'm watching you because you do this so well. And I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. So I'm drafting off of you, man. I'm drafting off of you. And I just appreciate your friendship. And by the way, you and I are going to be doing an interview for my podcast so people can
That's
listen to you
right.
on my podcast.
I can't wait. You know, when you said that, I thought about iron sharpens iron, my friend.
That's right.
And
That's
that's
right.
what we're doing. And so, hey, appreciate you. I cannot wait to share this. Have a great week, my friend.
Yeah. Thanks. You too, Bruce.